The truth about terror, that is the topic of tonight's byline. There's more disinformation than information out there about the Boston bombing. There have been reports of suspects arrested, then that was walked back. Pictures posted online by newspapers claiming that, well, these are the guys police are looking for. Denials that this is the case, and one of them coming out and saying, look, it's not me. There have been claims the Saudi student injured in the blast was a suspect, then not a suspect. Now claims he's being deported back to Saudi Arabia after President Obama met with the Saudi foreign minister, and then denials that that deportation would go ahead. There could be breaking news right now claiming the entire plot is the work of some specific group, but that will likely be denied by morning. And then there's the conspiracy theories. Those other things, that's what's being reported in the media. Look, I understand what's happening to reporters out there in the field. I've been there. You're sent to a breaking news event. Everyone wants something right now. Report, give us the latest. Editors call constantly, demanding the latest, demanding that you match the other guy that just reported after his editor called and demanded something new. And of course, the viewing, listening, and reading public all want to know what happened as well. There is tremendous pressure. Add to that leaks from one law enforcement branch that get contradicted by a different law enforcement branch, and you get the sorry display that we've seen over the last few days. It can lead to some awful moments in reporting. So I have sympathy for the people that appear to be making the mistakes in their reporting. They have many excuses. I don't feel the same way about Justin Trudeau, though. As I explained last night, Trudeau is wrong on many fronts. He excuses terror when he says that this happens because people are excluded. I want you to pay attention to something specific here, though. I made mention of it last night, but I want you to pay attention to what he says before he creates excuses, and consider his words in the light of 4 days worth of reporting and getting the story wrong.
We don't know now whether it was terrorism or a single crazy or a domestic issue or a foreign issue. I mean, all those questions. But there is no question that this happened because there is someone who feels completely excluded.
He made those statements Monday night. He said, we don't know who did this. Could be international, could be domestic. He's right on that point. And 4 days later, we still don't know. He says we can't know that, but we can't point fingers of blame. But this much is for sure. The people that did this did it because they were excluded. We simply cannot know that because we don't know who they are. Trudeau didn't go into this idea of worrying about feelings once. He went there twice. Check out the follow-up question by Peter Mansbridge. A fair question, not loaded in any way, and hear what Trudeau says.
Would you be picking up the phone, talking to the RCMP, CSIS, Border Patrol?
Of course.
Armed Forces?
Of course. I'd be worried about what specific targets there are. But we also need to make sure that as we go forward, we don't emphasize a culture of fear and mistrust, because that ends up marginalizing even further people who...
Would you talk to CSIS, the RCMP, and the Army? Oh, sure, but we can't point fingers. Prime Minister Stephen Harper jumped on Trudeau's comments yesterday.
When you see this type of action, when you see this type of violent act, you do not sit around trying to rationalize it or make excuses for it or figure out its root causes. You condemn it categorically, and to the extent you can deal with the perpetrators, you deal with them as harshly as possible. And that's what this government would do if it were ever faced with such actions.
Those comments upset young Justin, who accused the Prime Minister of politicizing this tragedy. I don't really think so. Trudeau was asked what he would do if he were Prime Minister and this event happened. He said he'd worry about people being excluded. Asked about talking to security forces, he said, yes, but let's not point the fingers of blame. Well, what about when they find the culprit? Will he be willing and able to point fingers of blame, or will he be worried about making sure that everyone is included? Well, Justin Trudeau and the Liberals will make any criticism of this about him personally, and will say it's just people going negative. Those Conservatives go negative. He doesn't. Sure, he calls them divisive and destructive, but that's not going negative in his eyes. And Trudeau says he doesn't want to exclude people and worries about marginalizing others. Of course, he also says Quebecers are better than the rest of the country, and the country's better off when run by Quebecers. Of course, pointing out the flaws in Trudeau's logic is not about attacking him. It's about assessing his leadership abilities. He says he wants to lead this country and replace the current government. These comments leave a lot of room for doubt that he's the right man. We all have blind spots. We all have weaknesses. Justin Trudeau's just happened to be Well, they include being fuzzy on terrorism, national security, and crime. And that's the byline.
You said Canada needed to address, in some ways, the root causes of terrorism. I wonder if you could expand on that.
Obviously, we have to make sure that as we move forward, we look at creating a safe community, a safe country, a safe world for all citizens and all individuals, and that happens both with security and with a significant commitment to peace, as highlighted in our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Our next guest knows what it's like to be a victim of terror. Maureen Basnicki lost her husband Ken on 9/11. Since then, she has devoted much of her time towards activism to help victims of terrorism. Maureen, thanks for coming in today.
Thank you for
I want to ask you about the conference that you're dealing with and what you're hoping to accomplish with current governments. But first, I want to ask you your initial thoughts when you heard Mr. Trudeau's comments.
I only heard them last night because I have been involved in this conference, and I have to say my initial reaction was a big disappointment.
Did it bring back memories of past comments?
Oh yes, by that political party actually, because if you recall, the Liberals were in power, and our leader at the time, our former Prime Minister, when there was an outpouring 6 months after 9/11 to have a memorial in Canada, his comments were, these things happen from time to time. I see no reason to mark that occasion. And then on the first year anniversary, in his interview with Peter Mansbridge, he suggested that it was Western greed that was the root cause of terrorism. And so I just hope that not only Mr. Trudeau, Justin, but all our political leaders will re-examine terrorism and be more forceful and turn their attention to the victims.
It must be difficult because we've got experts. I mean, CSIS has put out reports on this idea that it's exclusion that motivates terrorism. Academics have put it out, and all the ones I've read come to the same conclusion. That's not the case. So it must frustrate you that this continues to be a thought process that's out there. It's not just Mr. Trudeau. This is widely held by a lot of people. And meanwhile, off on the other side, you've got yourself saying, well, forget about them. What about the victims?
Absolutely. The conference that I'm attending right now is Giving Victims a Voice. It's being sponsored by our Canadian Ombudsman. And I'm meeting many high-profile victims from various types of crime. And we're trying to change the conversation. There's a reaction that seems to focus on the perpetrator. And in my case, it's the terrorists. And really, first and foremost, we have to take care of the victims. And did you know that there's no plan or policy in place right now for anybody that's a victim of violent crime outside our Canadian borders? So we had over 2,000 runners in Boston, and thankfully they escaped physical injury. I don't know psychologically how they're handling it, but when they come home to Canada, they'll find that there is no federal plan or policy in place that comes to the aid of victims of terror or any kind of violent crime.
I'm still focusing on Jean Chrétien saying that these things happen from time to time. 9/11 is not the sort of thing that happens from time to time. It took the families from Air India a long time to get some recognition of what happened there.
Yes.
Have you learned any lessons from them for getting a 9/11 memorial, or have you been working with them to push for a victim's advocacy on issues of terrorism?
Yes. In fact, the Air India families and myself and other Canadian 9/11 victims are one big family. Sadly, we all faced the same lack of plan or policy. But I'd like to remind you, even with Air India, we had a different party in power, and it was a conservative government at that time. And the same thing, there wasn't a response to the Canadians. The majority of the victims of Air India were
Canadian citizens.
Yes. And so I'd like to say that our government didn't handle that right at the time. And you know, terrorism, we keep emphasizing, it doesn't know borders. It doesn't know what country you are in or where you live. It certainly doesn't know what province you live in or what political party you belong to. This is a matter that should be engaged by all our political leaders, and victims should be embraced and have their needs tend to, and let's change the conversation.
All right, Maureen Basnicki, thanks so much. I know that one of the things you want to work on, and perhaps we'll have you back closer to the September 11th anniversary, is making that a day of service, but we're out of time now. Thanks so much for dropping by today.
You're welcome.